Good evening. The eclipse of the century has duly taken place, and it was every bit as fascinating and every bit as important as we hoped it would be. And in this programme, we're going to try and pull all the observations together and give you a general picture of what actually happened. So, first of all, let's look at the eclipse track. Now, this band here, stretching right across Africa, is the band of totality. And so if you were anywhere in that area, the sun would have been completely hidden, and for a few minutes you would have seen the inner atmosphere, which is called the chromosphere, the glorious pearly corona, which is outside that still, and those glowing masses of gas which we call the prominences. They used to be called red flames, but of course they are not flames at all. And that band is about 150 miles wide. And round about here, in Mauritania, totality lasted for over 6 minutes. Now, to either side of that band of totality, there's an area of partial phase. And if you were anywhere there, you would have seen the sun partly hidden by the moon. And as you will see, the extreme limit of the partial zone extends through the southernmost part of England. And from my own observatory at Selsey, John Miller took this picture of the partial eclipse. And if you look at the bottom part of the disk and just over towards the right, you will see there what looks like a tiny bite out of the sun. And that, of course, is the dark, invisible body of the moon. Well, that's all you saw from South England, and had you been far north of Selsey, you wouldn't have seen anything at all. So let's go back now to the track of totality. I was about there on the ship Monte Umbi, just over 20 miles off the African coast, and there were about 300 astronomers with me, one of whom was Commander Henry Hatfield, whom I think all viewers of the sky at night are going to know. On the coast of Mauritania, actually just outside the track of totality, was a rocket team, and with them was Dr. Robert Spear of Imperial College. Further in Africa, there in Niger, right in the central track, was yet another expedition, and with them was Mr. John James of the University of Manchester. In Kenya, down there, again in the track of totality, was yet a further expedition, and with them was Dr. Barry Jones of the Open University. And quite apart from these, and others which I have not mentioned, there was the Concorde aircraft. And that flew down the eclipse track, following the moon shadow, and gave them a totality of over 70 minutes to those on board, which included Dr. John Beckman of Queen Mary College. Well, those then are some of the observers, and we're going to try and pull all this lot together. But I think I'm going to start, if I may, with my own experiences. And so let's go and have a look at what happened on the eclipse ship carrying all those astronomers, the Monte Umbi. The Monte Umbi sailed from Liverpool a week before the eclipse with 300 members of the British Astronomical Association on board. Some people were just going to enjoy the eclipse, but most of us intended to take photographs or carry out experiments during totality. It really was a unique expedition. And, of course, what conditions we should find was anybody's guess. The advantages of observing an eclipse from a ship are the absence of smoke and dust and the freedom to go exactly where you want. The disadvantage, of course, is the motion of the ship itself, even at anchor, and there were many ideas for coping with this difficulty. As soon as we got to sea, there was a great deal of activity on the Monte Umbi, with everybody busy preparing equipment and rehearsing experiments. Personally, I was hoping to hunt for comets during totality. Many people were working in teams to carry out coordinated photographic programs. Others were working in pairs and smaller groups, and many more were getting equipment ready for their individual experiments. As we went south, the climate got steadily hotter, and we were all sweltering. Sun hats became the order of the day. The practicing went on, not only for the astronomers, but also for the meteorologists.
Take B, C. Take A. Set B.
The group using this tape recording came from Croydon. They'd worked out an elaborate photographic routine, and they'd built a special mounting to stabilize their cameras. I talked to one of the group, Keith Brackenborough.
Keith,
First of all, what cameras have you got?
Well, we've got 3 cameras. One here on the right for corona experiments, a large telephoto for prominences, and a cine camera for the vital minutes of totality.
Obviously, one trouble is the fact that the boat's going to be swaying around. How will you cope with that?
Well, we didn't know what sort of problem this would be, so we constructed something which will counteract quite a considerable movement, if there is such a movement. We made a homemade device from wood, which is based on the pivots, so it'll move in both directions, and therefore we can hold the sun on throughout our cameras all the time.
Gerard Rawlings had an unusual technique. Gerard, what are you aiming to photograph during totality?
I want to get the corona, and if possible the diamond ring and Bailey's beads, but first and foremost the corona.
And how are you coping with the problems of stability?
Well, I've got this curious object, which is known as a rifle pod. It was made for me by an international marksman.
Yes. How do you use this rifle butt?
Like this, and I can keep it... the overall movement's about 3 to 6 minutes of arc.
And you reckon you'll be able to keep that steady enough?
I can hold that absolutely steady.
This curious-looking windmill is yet another mounting for a telescope and camera. It was specially designed to overcome the movement of the ship by John Rowland. John, I take it you're after the corona.
I am. I'm hoping to get some fairly detailed pictures with this instrument.
3-inch refractor?
Yes.
Well, do tell us about this remarkable stabilizing device.
Well, the theory is that these very long arms have heavy weights on the end of them, about 22 pounds each. The whole thing is supported on a central ball joint, which has very little friction. The whole thing has a very high moment of inertia, and if the ship, and therefore the tripod on which the thing is standing, moves in any direction, then the cross at the top should remain stationary.
What about wind resistance, though?
Unfortunately, it has a rather high wind resistance, but we would hope that on the day of the eclipse, as the ship will be stationary, there won't be much wind.
Have you actually tested it out yet?
Yes, I've tested it on a barge on the Thames. It seems to work quite well.
John Wall had brought this apparatus for one of his experiments. Well, I hardly expected to see an all-sky camera at a total eclipse. What are you aiming to do, John?
Well, we're going to photograph the sky from horizon to horizon through 180 degrees, and the idea is to photograph any colour changes that might take place just before, during and after the eclipse.
Not the stars particularly?
Not particularly, no. Just we might see the moon shadow coming across, and we might see some other peculiar phenomena that...
no one knows.
No one knows, no.
Oh, well, I've never heard of this being done before at a total eclipse. In fact, has it?
Not to my knowledge, no.
But I gather you are going to go for the corona as well.
Yes, yes. Should show up very nicely on the dome.
Well, Horace Dall seems to have chosen the very windiest part of the deck. Horace, I gather you'll get a handhold.
Yes, I'm intending to do it that way because I believe you can hold it just as steadily that way on a heaving deck as you can on a tripod.
What exposure are you going to give?
A 30th of a second.
And what, it looked to me as if you were balancing the camera on your teeth.
No, strictly speaking, it was on my nose, quite hard on my nose, like this.
All these individual practice sessions culminated in a dress rehearsal the day before the eclipse. And as the time drew near, the atmosphere on the ship became noticeably tense.
Get it fairly firm.
Julia can count down from about 5 seconds before.
Yeah.
Then we're all right because we've got 6 minutes, 4 seconds. I managed to find about 3/4 of a minute spare.
And then we want the end of time, and then we want time before the third contact as well. We've got to have that accurately too. No, exactly.
On the morning of June the 30th, we were all rather worried by the hazy conditions. But the sky remained clear enough to give us a good view of the partial phase as it developed. Here's the sun as we saw it a short time before it disappeared. The moon has almost completely covered the disk, and by now, totality is only a matter of minutes away. We all had our cameras ready, and the temperature was dropping markedly. At this time, all over the ship, the tension was tremendous. We knew that we'd have no second chance. The light began to go down very rapidly, and the moon shadow raced towards us over the sea. Within a few seconds, from daylight, the whole ship was plunged into darkness. And there's the corona, and there's a brilliant prominence to the side of the sun. This is incredible, the best corona I think I've ever seen in my life. It really is incredible. Now, round there, you can't see the outer corona at the moment, but you can see the inner corona beautifully. The moon in the middle there, and a curious ashen light all the way round. There aren't any stars visible at the moment. We thought we might see some, but in fact we don't seem to be able to get those. So you can't see any of the stars. There are two prominences, a magnificent one over to the right-hand side of the sun. We rather expected that, because we knew that there was a big sunspot around. This corona is quite the best I have seen. That prominence may, I think, be as good as the famous looped prominence that was seen in the eclipse of 1918, so long ago. And of course, here on the Monte Umbi, everybody is working absolutely flat out, because this 6 minutes is going to seem to flash by. And now I can see at the top of the sun another prominence. It's difficult to tell exactly what kind the corona is, because there is a certain amount of cloud up there. But you can see that it's more or less symmetrical around the sun, so it's intermediate between what we call solar maximum and solar minimum types, which is really rather interesting. I think there probably are quite a number of coronal streamers around, but of course those we can't at the present moment see. Now we're almost approaching now the very middle of this eclipse. And of course, because this is a long eclipse, we're going to get the maximum darkness. Round the sun now, I can just start to see the outer corona, which I didn't think we were going to see at all, frankly. This strange, eerie quality. Everything seems as if it's stopping. All nature seems to stop. There's hardly a breath of wind now, at least I can't feel any. Now the corona seems to be brightening. And those prominences, I can now see 3 prominences and a coronal plume. It's difficult to tell just how far the corona extends. I can see a faint sheen round the sun, and now I can actually see 1 or 2 of the brighter stars. There's a strange, eerie quality about the light. Now we can see the diamond ring will be appearing in a minute. We've got there's the diamond ring, and the diamond ring has appeared. An incredible sight. There it is, the ring has appeared, the corona's vanished, and that is the end of this eclipse of the century. And by Jove, was it worth seeing? Well, that was a breathtaking sight. I've seen 3 total eclipses before, but nothing to compare with this one. Conditions weren't absolutely ideal because there was a certain amount of haze around, but nothing to spoil the beauty of the scene. The inner corona was magnificent. We couldn't see the outer parts, but in a way that enhanced the beauty of the brilliant inner corona. And there were some magnificent red prominences of a kind that I've never seen before. The sky turned a curious dark mauvey blue, and there was an eerie quality about the light altogether. We couldn't actually see the stars, but there were 2 bright planets on view, Venus and Saturn. And when the end of the eclipse came, the diamond ring effect was absolutely superb. And then there was just a sliver of the sun appeared once more from behind the moon, and in a twinkling of an eye, the eclipse was over, and the light came back, and the shadow rushed away over the sea. Immediately the eclipse was over, everyone was busy packing up equipment. The ship herself promptly weighed anchor and sailed away northward towards Nuadhibu. Now, the atmosphere on board became altogether more relaxed, now that the great moment was over. And there were even some strictly non-astronomical activities. Well, Keith, how did it go?
Very well indeed, Patrick. We were a little worried about vibration, but in actual fact, we followed the eclipse all the time through the cameras.
What about your computerized tape? Did that work all right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, no trouble at all with that.
No hitches?
I don't think so. Of course, we can't really say till we see our final results, but it was really magnificent.
What did you think of the eclipse itself?
Oh, it's unforgettable.
Next, what about John Rowland and his ingenious windmill? John, did your windmill work as well as you thought it would?
Well, it stopped turning during the eclipse, which is what it was supposed to do. Yes, it was quite good.
And the telescope was absolutely steady?
Not absolutely, but it didn't move very much during the exposures. In practice, it moved far more than it did today, and the practice shots came out very well.
Have you got some good shots of the corona, do you think?
I think so, yes. I got 1 shot on a second, which should blast it out quite a long way.
One thing that interests me, what are you going to do with the windmill now? I don't suppose you're going to use it for this kind of thing again.
Well, I'm going to melt the lead down and sell it back to the person I bought it from.
Dr. Ron Madison of Keele University had been doing a number of experiments during the eclipse. You know, Ron, this was regarded as a long eclipse. It didn't seem very long to me. Did you have time to carry out all your program?
Actually, I think we did. We did quite well. I had actually about 10 or 15 seconds to stand and watch it in between pictures, but to me it was the quickest 6-bit minutes I've ever experienced.
You know, when I realised we only had about a minute to go, I just couldn't believe it.
No, I had my daughter on the stopwatches, and she was shouting out 5.5 minutes, just as if they were seconds. It was so busy that time passed without realising it.
Which do you think are your most successful experiments out of this one?
Well, I'm sure the flash spectrum came over well. I watched it through the monitor, and the lines appeared just as they were predicted, but it was literally a flash spectrum. I think it lasted about 5 seconds.
Stand clear of the walls.
Well, how did it go with you, Gerard? Cheers.
Well, I think as far as the photography was concerned, the advantage was with the heavier equipment.
Yes.
If it had been blowing a gale, I might have had a chance. But it was the realization of a lifelong ambition. It's one of 3 things that I've most wanted to see in life.
How did your own photography go?
Well, I'm not too happy about it because I'm not quite sure whether I did or did not forget to remove the filter before I shot the Corona.
Oh, dear.
It was on when I'd finished, but whether I put it back on for safety or whether it had been on all along, I just can't remember.
I only hope it was off, that's all. Rotten luck. I'm sure it'll be all right. Well, we still don't know whether Gerard's photographs came out. I very much hope they did, because it was, after all, a most ingenious device and deserved to work really well. Personally, my comet hunt was entirely unsuccessful. In fact, I didn't even try it, because the sky didn't get dark enough. And when I said I could see the brighter stars during the eclipse, I ought to have said the brighter planets. Actually, I only saw Venus and a star-like thing above me, which I realized afterwards was Saturn, which was rather unfortunate. However, there it was. And instead of hunting for comets, I did try my hand at photographing the corona, and you probably heard my camera clicking away as I was making that commentary. And I must, I think, show you one of my pictures. It's not particularly brilliant. It's not too bad. I'm rather proud of it. You can see the inner corona there. And only for a few brief seconds did I glimpse any part of the outer corona. But, of course, that's on a small scale, and I can't match the photography of some of the other experts who were on board, notably Henry. Henry, your photographs are really good.
Well, Patrick, I wouldn't like to comment on the quality of my photographs. I took 35 during the eclipse with my Cooke triplet lens, which has a focal length of 20 inches. It's what I call the flower bin camera. And if we can see the first one, this was taken just an instant before totality, and that is Bailey's beads, overexposed. There is a little red just above that blob in the middle there. I'm not too certain that it shows too well on television. The next one is the corona. Now, this exposure was 125th of a second at f6.3. The next one was a 60th of a second. You can see there's more corona. The next one was a 1/4 of a second. And you can see there's a lot of corona and what I call little wispy things coming out. What they are, I don't know, but they're pretty. And you can notice, too, that the colour of the sun is rather palish greenish blue. Now, this next one was an 1/8 of a second. And the last one of all was the diamond ring. That diamond ring in the centre there was in actual fact the minutest pinprick of light coming through some lunar mountains. And here it's grossly overexposed. This had 125th of a second at f6.3 again.
Well, quite obviously, your stabilizing device worked well.
No, it didn't, Patrick, because, as a matter of fact, although I'd made it, I tested it just a few minutes before totality, and I decided that the Monte Umbi herself was far more stable than my stabilizing device, so I locked it.
Anyway, I think the photographs are really good, and many congratulations, Henry.
Thank you.
Well, of course, on board the Monte Umbe, there were many astronomers, most of them amateur and a few professional. But quite apart from that, there were some really fully-fledged professional expeditions to the mainland to study the eclipse in various aspects. And one of these was the rocket site, which had been specially built not far away from Nouadhibou in Mauritania. And this, I think, unfortunately, has turned out to be something of a sad story. But when we actually went to Nouadhibou, we didn't know quite what the situation was. Nouadhibou is a market town on the edge of the Sahara Desert, cut off from everywhere else by sand dunes and strongly pervaded by a smell of bad fish from its one factory, which makes fertilizer. The rocket base was just outside Nouadhibou. The scientists were still waiting to recover the payload from the desert, approximately 100 miles away, when I talked to one engineer, Joe Paxton. You know, Joe, looking round among the sand dunes of Mauritania, it looks pretty inhospitable to me. We're not very far from the rocket site, after all. Did you have to build the site from scratch?
Yes, it was built from scratch. The Americans from Kitt Peak National Observatory, who are our colleagues and partners in this project, have brought nearly 20 tons of equipment from America by air and have set up in a period of 4 weeks a complete rocket site with ground tracking and all the other essentials.
What about the rocket flight itself? How did it go?
The rocket flight wasn't too bad. We got to the height we wanted, but the pointing wasn't what we wanted. We didn't actually observe the corona of the sun. The payload itself is now sitting out in the desert somewhere, waiting to be picked up.
Have you located it?
Yes, we have. We haven't been able to get down below about 600 feet in the aircraft, but we have seen it in the desert and know it to be there.
What about the rocket base itself? Are you dismantling that now?
It's being taken down now. It took about a month to build. It'll take a lot less than that to take down, I assure you.
Any special problems?
Yes, there have been special problems. You have to bring everything with you. Firing rockets is not like other things. You can't pop along to the corner shop and buy what you haven't brought. So we've had problems with things that inevitably get forgotten.
Well, unfortunately, it does now seem that Joe Paxton's pessimism was justified. Bob, you were actually there. What happened?
Well, first let's concentrate on the things that went well. The rocket was launched by our American and Canadian colleagues to within 0.4 of a second of the planned time. The equipment, the payload, the SRC equipment, worked well and functioned faultlessly. Now, the problem was that rockets are deliberately spun in order to improve their aerodynamic flight properties. And there is a critical maneuver called the D-spin, in which the spinning is stopped, and it is this that failed, and we do not know the reason why. Now, because the rocket was spinning, the maneuver to point to the sun was impossible, and so the vehicle, the payload, searched a region of the sky, coning and spinning, and that is really all we know.
Jolly bad luck. What had you actually hoped to do?
Well, I have here an example of the coronal spectrum that we hoped to achieve. This is in the ultraviolet region of the spectrum, and on this scale, the visible, what we see normally, would be over here. Now, the crucial point is that there is a region in here that has never been seen, and we hoped to record that spectrum for the first time.
Do you think you're going to get anything out of that rocket flight at all?
Well, as a consolation, we may be able to get an upper limit on the F coronal intensity, that is the zodiacal light intensity, in this region of the ultraviolet.
If the payload wasn't too badly damaged, can you use it again at a future eclipse?
Well, we're very lucky in that respect because the payload was recovered in mint condition from the Sahara, and it does seem natural to think in terms of reflying this experiment again in the Australian eclipse.
Well, I'm quite sure it will work next time. Bob, thank you very much, and I say better luck next time.
Thank you.
But the other air experiment, the Concorde, was quite different. And this seems to have been a tremendous success. That's true, isn't it, John?
Yes, as far as one can judge from a first look at the data, everything worked well. Certainly, I know that the apparatus worked according to plan.
Well, as we went out, we did call in at Las Palmas, and we actually saw the Concorde coming in there, looking for all the world like some strange and highly powerful bird. We reached Las Palmas just in time to see Concorde touch down, ready for her flight along the Eclipse track with 5 astronomers on board. Her arrival caused a lot of interest among the local people. At the controls of the flight was the famous French test pilot André Tacquart, and I asked him what special problems were involved for him in chasing the moon's shadow right across the continent of Africa.
The two problems are really, first, to be right on time on the track, on the desired track for the eclipse. The allowance that has been given to us is no advance at all, and not more than 15 seconds late at the rendezvous point, which is not easy to achieve. And the second problem for the pilot standpoint is the landing conditions in Fort Lamy, because we are late in June, and what the Met officers call the intertropical front is there, and we can well have some thunderstorms. Normally they occur later in the afternoon, but nevertheless we'll have to check during the flight that our destination is clear.
Well, I sincerely hope it's all right. And just one last point, Captain. In all your vast flying career, is this probably the most unusual flight you ever made, do you think?
Certainly, and I don't know if on our pilot logbook we can book that as a day flight or a night flight.
Well, a 74-minute totality is quite something. John, what did it look like?
Well, the whole atmosphere was very exciting, and to start with, it looked just like a normal eclipse. I'd never seen one before, but I've seen eclipses picture, and it looked normal. But after about 15 minutes, when my eye began to get dark adapted, through my visual guider, I began to see more and more of the corona, until after perhaps 20 minutes, I was seeing corona out to perhaps 2 degrees away from the surface of the moon. This was in fact the limit placed upon me by the guider itself. I'm sure if I had a wider field I'd have been able to see even more. This is quite remarkable. And then even more exciting, right at the end of totality, at third contact, instead of seeing, as one would from the ground, a brief, perhaps 2 or 3 second red flash as the chromosphere flashes out in red H-alpha light, hydrogen light, I saw the same phenomenon lasting a good 30 seconds. In fact, I saw the whole of the chromosphere shining as a brilliant red rim around the edge of the moon.
You know, thinking about it, you and your colleagues on board the Concorde must have seen now more totality than almost anybody else living.
Oh, so I believe, almost certainly. And of course, it was a great privilege to have this very great advantage for one's observations.
Well, so far as your observation was concerned, what were you actually doing, technically?
I was operating an interferometer which was looking at infrared radiation coming from the chromosphere. The chromosphere is a thin, cool boundary layer between the photosphere, which is the bright visible disk, and the corona, which has been seen before. It's the coolest part of the sun. It's also very interesting because many competing energy flow processes are going on in the chromosphere. It's a very tangled region, and an understanding of the chromosphere is essential to a thorough understanding of the corona.
Well, we've got a model of the Concorde here. Do show us exactly where you were.
Well, the window that our equipment was looking through was just here. It was the front of 4 windows. It was a 12-centimetre clear disc of crystal quartz, a single crystal of quartz. Behind us was a rather larger window used for near-infrared observations by a French team. Behind that was a window similar to ours, used for photography, also by a French team. And then finally there was an American window used for visible spectroscopy. I can perhaps show you a little more about the Concorde in a set of pictures. The first picture shows high activity on the morning of the eclipse itself. I can be seen squatting on top of the aircraft, lovingly polishing the quartz window, actually with a handkerchief, to make sure, of course, that it was perfectly clean. before takeoff. The next picture shows the Concorde taking off from Las Palmas Military Airport en route for the eclipse. Already we could see about a third of the solar disk obscured at that point as we took off. We were just looking at it. And here is the infrared detecting equipment. The two people in the picture, actually, one of them is Monsieur Acker, who was one of the French liaison team helping us with the experiment. The other person is Mr. Peter Reeder, an electronics engineer who was from RSRS Slough, giving us valuable supporting help on the assignment.
Well, how long do you think it's going to take you to get all your results together?
I think we'll have a first cut at the data with some new material gleaned from it, perhaps in a couple of months. The detailed analysis, the wavelength-dependent analysis, may take as much as a year.
Anyway, clearly it has been a tremendous success, and very many congratulations, John.
Thank you.
And so, now, back to the mainland and Niger, with John James and his team. But of course, Niger is a rather inhospitable and remote part of Africa. John, how did you get there?
Well, our particular measurements required the longest possible totality, so we had to go to that part of the path where we could get nearly 7 minutes. And this meant the central Sahara Desert, the Aïr Mountains. So we took a year to plan and build our apparatus. Then when it was ready, we loaded it all into a Land Rover and drove it there across the desert. We drove over sand, we drove through gravel, we took petrol, of course, in jerry cans. We arrived finally in the Aïr Mountains. These are volcanic, very broken, difficult country, and we found a small village, the village of El Meki, and there, right in the middle of the main street, we set up our apparatus. We tested everything. We had a concrete plinth. We were there 10, 12 days. Everything worked very well, but 2 days before totality, dust. A dust storm came in from the sand. Visibility was 200 yards. Dust in the air stopped us seeing a thing.
What rotten luck again. What were you actually going to do? Study the corona?
Yes, we were looking at the far outer part of the corona. We were going to look at the far outer part of the corona to look at the sunlight scattered from dust in interplanetary space. And with the instrument we had, we would have been able to measure the motion of this dust to tell us whether the dust cloud is part of the solar system.
Well, as I said to Bob, I'm afraid I must say again, better luck next time.
Thank you.
Thank you again. But, Barry, I gather conditions in Kenya were a great deal better, weren't they?
Yes, well, it's a pretty remote area of the world. But in fact, we were pretty well looked after up there by an American expedition.
Well, I was originally going to go to Kenya myself. In the end, of course, I went on the boat. But I gather conditions there were pretty good. So I think it's worthwhile now just having a look at the kind of country you were in at this total eclipse.
Well, this peninsula sticks out into the crocodile-infested Lake Rudolph, and on it, most of the experiments were sited. Here you see some of the largely American people starting to get ready. We had 3 weeks there. Oh, and this grass hut was my experiment because I didn't have to see the sun, as you'll see. These are some of the local people, many of whom were very afraid of the eclipse, and during totality retired to their grass huts and stayed there and didn't come out. However, some of the local people had listened to the Voice of Kenya broadcast and were warned that it was quite a natural phenomenon. And here you see one of them getting all ready to look at the sun safely through a piece of exposed film. So he at least wasn't going to retire to his grass hut and sit there shivering, as so many of them did.
Well, what exactly were your experiments designed to do?
Well, I was measuring the effect of the eclipse on atmospheric pressure. The sun directly warms the atmosphere at various levels throughout it. And of course, during a solar eclipse, the sun's radiation gets cut off, and so the atmosphere cools. Now, accompanying this cooling, you get a change in pressure. And this pressure propagates to the ground, where I was sitting with a microbarometer ready to see what I could see.
And what will these measurements tell you?
Well, they'll tell us the sort of mechanisms by which the sun directly heats up the solar atmosphere, the sort of mechanisms and also where in the atmosphere this kind of activity is going on.
Let's have a look at your actual barometer, the one you used.
Yes. Well, here it is. It's a very simple device. It's just a trapped mass of air which is kept at constant pressure. The temperature is very carefully stabilized, and one side of the chamber is closed off by a thin membrane. So when the external pressure changes, the position of the membrane changes, and we can detect this electronically by this gadget here, and consequently tell what the pressure was.
How sensitive is it?
Well, it can measure pressure changes of 1 part in a million, and it discriminates strongly against acoustic noise. I can bang it and you don't see anything.
John, I gather that one of your colleagues at Queen Mary College was doing the same thing somewhere else in collaboration with Barry.
Yes, this is correct. One of my graduate students, Mr. Ian Clucas, built an instrument along very similar lines to this one and set it up at Queen Mary College, ready to look at the possible eclipse pulse. And from the charts we have, it appears that we may have seen something, possibly anyway. Of course, this will have to be looked at very closely. This occurred about 2 hours after the passage of totality through Africa.
Do those results agree with yours, Barry?
Well, not entirely, but you have to remember that the sites in London and in Africa are very different. What we saw was this. I've just taken a sample of much more data just to show you. During the day, this is time along the bottom here, the pressure fell just because of the local weather passing through. Now, this is the first contact, that's the last contact, and this is the region of totality in the middle. And what we should have seen was a pressure change of something like this, about 100 parts per million, waving about like that. And as you can see, just from this sample of data, this just didn't happen. We just went straight through. Now, we've got a lot more data, which we have to look at very carefully to see if there was, in fact, a small effect buried in there.
So, in fact, as well as solving many problems, this eclipse has raised others.
Oh, it certainly has.
As
yes.
I suppose one would expect. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And so, taking the eclipse as a whole, I think we must say it has been a tremendous success, despite a few inevitable mishaps and malfunctions. In England, we've got to wait until August the 11th, 1999, for our next total eclipse. There will, of course, be others in other parts of the world before then. But I'm quite sure that, from my own point of view at least, no eclipse of the future will ever come up to this past one, which was so well named the Eclipse of the Century. Good night. And the diamond ring has appeared. An incredible sight. There it is, the ring has appeared, the corona's vanished, and that is the end of this eclipse of the century. And by Jove, was it worth seeing?